Let's stay on this story. I mentioned Kerry Buck. Well, our Chase team has reached her in Ottawa. She is a former Canadian ambassador to NATO. Ambassador Buck, you know me, I like to get right to things. President Zelensky addressed NATO today, and now the leaders are behind closed doors. You've been part of all of that. You've been privy to those conversations, the pushes and the pulls. What's happening behind those doors now?
Well, the meeting should be over by now. I wasn't behind these closed doors, but I have been in the past, as you said. So President Zelensky's address to NATO, they made public. And my assessment is that inside the discussion would have focused on two things. What more NATO allies can do to help meet some of the needs that President Zelensky set out in his speech, which include his desire to close the skies. I don't expect that there'll be any shift at all on the NATO position on a no-fly zone.
Right.
I don't expect that, because essentially a no-fly zone or a humanitarian corridor is tantamount to engaging in a direct war with Russia.
I'm just not. I'm not understanding why, what the difference is. Why the difference is between a no-fly zone and a humanitarian corridor? Because one is to protect people, and that can have a time limit on it. It can have a distinct path on it. Why can that not be considered something completely different?
Well, a humanitarian corridor, if it were negotiated and agreed to by Russia, would be entirely feasible. But the challenge is that to achieve a humanitarian corridor, you have to make sure that the people exiting through that humanitarian corridor and the goods going in to help people are protected from air and ground attacks. So without Russia agreeing to it, the risk of attacks on people and humanitarian goods would be extremely high. And in order to ensure that doesn't happen, if NATO were to take that on, they would be in a position of having to take out Russian ground weapons inside Russia, or take out Russian planes, which is a direct conflict with Russia. And that's the challenge. So what NATO leaders would have been discussing today is alternate ways of achieving some of the same effects for Ukraine. So I expect more anti-tank, more anti-aircraft weaponry to have been agreed. And I also expect, because of the threat of chemical or even nuclear weapons, that more support to Ukraine to provide them with some kind of protection against those weapons.
I wanted to expand on that. With chemical, biological, nuclear, tactical weapons. Is that where countries in these conversations are sort of, drawing their trip lines? That if this is used, then we're willing to go here. If this is used, well, we're willing to go there. Is that the purpose of some of these discussions right now? The what-if scenario?
Well, publicly, you'll notice that the SecGen has been very careful not to say what the red line is.
Yes.
And there is a tactical advantage in having strategic ambiguity, not to let Vladimir Putin know what that red line is. Absolutely not. But the alliance, the SecGen and all the leaders have also been very, very clear that not 1 inch of NATO territory should be crossed, that is an absolute bottom line, red line for the alliance, and that the alliance will step up in a major way to respond if there's any violation of NATO territory. So what you're seeing now is a shift from what we used to call deterrence through presence, which was the existence, for instance, of the battle groups in the Baltics, which would act as a tripwire. They could, in theory, be overrun, but then the whole alliance would move in. So now the alliance is shifting to deterrence through defense. A lot more troops at those borders, a lot more air, a lot more maritime, to send that strong message that those borders will be defended at all cost.
Final question for you, Kerry, and I do enjoy talking with you because I get to pick your brain as someone who's been there, done that. What about timing? Like, if this goes on, we're at a month already. If it goes on for another month, or heaven forbid, 6 months, does the appetite lessen with time when it comes to world leaders and their meetings and with the SecGen behind closed doors?
Well, I think one of the reasons that this summit was held now, and it's extraordinary, there have been 4 leaders' summits since the beginning of the war. Usually there's one a year maximum, so 4 in the last month, and this one was in person. And the main message, the main point is symbolic but very powerful symbolism, to have all of the leaders, plus Sweden, Finland, talking to Zelensky, all of them together in person, sending a message of unity and of resolve to Vladimir Putin. And part of the reason for having it now is to ensure that everyone stays on the same page, because you could see some, I won't call it fraying, but some allies who want NATO to do more going out ahead and going out ahead publicly. And maybe they're doing it to push the alliance, but the risk, of course, is that alliance unity could be impacted negatively. And that is one of Vladimir Putin's main strategic goals, to split the alliance,
Right.
and that can't happen. So that's the main point. And when you keep that regular pace of leaders' engagement, foreign minister, defense minister engagements, it helps ensure consistency of messaging, consistency of policy, and keep pressure on.
Right.
President Zelensky's addresses to Congress, to the House of Commons and everything, that's also designed to keep the public apprised of what Ukraine needs and to keep their concern high.